Picture this. It's May 29th, 1913. You're a wealthy French guy, here to watch the premiere of Igor Stravinsky's new ballet, The Rite of Spring. The same concert hall would flood with riots, boos, and hisses. The Rite of Spring would be known as the most controversial ballet of all of classical music history. So what happened? What triggered the audience so much? How was this composition created? For wealthy Parisian audiences, Stravinsky was mad. They were shocked and angered by the unconventional choreography and the music, and some argued that the choreography threw them off even more. It was the artistic scandal of the century. Stravinsky received major backlash. The public hated it, and people were angry. They were simply unprepared. And it makes sense. Classical music, especially back in the classical era, composers aimed to make music perfect. It was almost put on a pedestal, a higher level. Music was meant to be beautiful in the end. It was meant to be art. And for the Parisian audiences, what they saw on the stage was horrifying, even nightmare-inducing. People just kind of started hating on Stravinsky. However, over time, Stravinsky would be admired for his innovations and expansion of the musical language. How he shaped structures of music to produce melodies never appreciated by the upper-class audience, and would serve as an inspiration to modern-day composers. For instance, Bartók was heavily inspired by Stravinsky's use of folk music and rhythm complexity. Let's talk about Igor Stravinsky. He was a main pioneer in contemporary music, marking the change between the Romantic era to the Classical era. In his autobiography, Stravinsky stated, after finishing a successful ballet, The Firebird, "I had a fleeting vision, which came to me as a complete surprise. I saw in my imagination a solemn pagan rite, sage elders seated in a circle watching a young girl dance herself to death. They were sacrificing her for the god of spring. Such a theme created the Sacré du Printemps, which translates to Rite of Spring." Let's talk about the plot a little bit. So the story of the ballet basically goes as follows. There's part one where the prehistoric youth of Russia is playing games and having fun, and they're enjoying spring. They love the earth, but then the sage, a supernatural being, reminds them of the sacred rites. And every year, someone has to be sacrificed. So these people are like, oh, let's just sacrifice a young girl, the chosen one among them. And she's left alone in the forest. And the ancestors come out of the shadows like bears and form air. Inspired by them, she becomes possessed and starts dancing uncontrollably. And at last, she falls dead. And the ancestors approach and pick her up and lift her towards the skies. What Stravinsky wanted to do is that he aimed to bring music back to the origins of dance. This piece showed a different aspect to Russian culture. No composer has ever truly embodied the rural side of Russian culture in ballet. As a young kid, he grew up in a rural Russian village, and he was exposed to old Russian culture and received a lot of inspiration from villages surrounding his family country home. In the villages, people celebrated the seasons of planting and harvesting, as well as the mysteries of God and fate. This was celebrated through music, made with whatever they had available to them, their natural, untrained voices, their hands and feet, the instruments that they had built themselves. This resulted usually in a wild, enthusiastic mixture of noise. Stravinsky was greatly influenced by the beauty of these rituals and would try to evoke them through the posh symphony orchestra. He employed very strange instruments such as the bass clarinet and the bassoon. He also really played around with rhythm complexity. He would combine irregular meters as well as polyrhythms. He also added ostinatos, which are repetitive musical phrases, and this acted as a main theme of the ballet and served as an anchor to all this complexity. He also incorporated atonality, which is basically music without any key, as well as the presence of multiple key signatures. Dissonance, again, is also a main technique he used to create more of that primitive sound. And going back to the beginning of the piece, the beginning starts with a very unfamiliar sound, and that instrument right there is the bassoon. And the reason why it sounds this weird is because it's played at a very high register, and which made it sound very strained and unnatural. Again, this reflects the primitive sounds in disguising the sophisticated bassoon. This piece clashed between folk music and contemporary ideals, and this is what created the phenomenal ballet we know today. Now you might notice the jagged, sharp, stoic blocking moves, the creepy sensation as the dancers all jumped in unison. As the ballet was reaching to its end, a girl in the middle of the troupe danced violently and eventually succumbed herself to support, sacrificing herself to spring gods with a clash of one final sharp chord. And this work was all because of Slavomir Nijinsky. He was a legendary ballet dancer and a choreographer, and he was considered one of the greatest male dancers of the early 20th century. He would break free from traditional choreography techniques, favoring angular, jerky movements that mirrored the primitive themes to reflect the primal aspects of the dance. The dancer performed with bent limbs and flat feet, which is a contrast to traditional ballets, in which dancers have to dance with pointed feet as a resemblance of sophistication. The ballet's intense story was showcased through the rough, expressive movements of the dancers. The Rite of Spring can be best described in one word: futuristic. As if a time machine from the future brought back an unknown item. It was truly something that the public had not seen. And I recommend you go and listen to it, and you might notice is that it's not as controversial to our ears today, because we've already had experience with listening to pieces like this, or in our daily lives. It doesn't sound as riot-inducing as back then. And this is because humans naturally progress with events and conflict. As society, we just move along. And we see this in culture as well as history. And powerful pieces like the Rite of Spring shake our future and the history of classical music. What about a piece that's even more crazy? A piece that is pure silence. A piece that, to this day, people still debate whether it is music. Check out this video to find out. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.